There are places where silence speaks louder than words. Where the wind carries stories across the water, and the trees remember everything. This was one of those places. A quiet lake cabin, tucked beneath the canopy of time. A sanctuary. A beginning. And, as it turns out, a battleground. I came here to escape. To breathe. To rebuild something buried beneath deadlines and noise. The cabin wasn't much, cedar-framed, moss-kissed, with a dock that creaked like an old man's knees. But it was mine. Bought fair and square. No HOA. No neighbors. No rules. Just the lake, the sky, and the promise of solitude. The gravel road twisted through pine and birch, dipped beneath low-hanging branches, and opened into a clearing. There it stood, weathered, quiet, waiting. I parked the truck, stepped out, and for the first time in years, I exhaled. The air smelled of damp earth and pine needles. The lake shimmered like glass, untouched by wind or worry. Birdsong echoed from the trees, and somewhere in the distance, a loon called out, long, mournful, beautiful. I unloaded slowly. Blankets, books, a kettle I hadn't used in years. Each item felt like a piece of myself returning home. Inside, the cabin was simple. Wood-paneled walls, a stone fireplace, a small kitchen with mismatched mugs. I lit a candle. Opened the windows. Let the forest, Indiana. That night, I slept like the dead. No sirens. No streetlights. Just the sound of water lapping gently against the dock. But peace is a fragile thing. And solitude is often mistaken for weakness. It began on a Tuesday. I was stacking firewood near the porch when I heard it, the unmistakable sound of entitlement on wheels. A white SUV, polished to suburban perfection, rolled up the gravel path like it owned the forest. She stepped out wearing sunglasses that cost more than my monthly groceries. Clipboard in hand. Lipstick too red for the woods. And a voice that could curdle milk. "You can't park here," she said. I blinked. "Excuse me? This is HOA property," she snapped. "You're trespassing." I told her, calmly, that she was mistaken. That this cabin was outside the HOA's jurisdiction. That I had the deed, the surveyor's map, and the legal documents to prove it. She didn't care. Karen never does. She called the cops. 2 officers arrived. Polite. Tired. They checked my papers. They nodded. They apologized. "She does this a lot," one whispered. "She thinks she owns the lake." They left. She didn't. The next morning, I found a note taped to my door. Handwritten. Aggressive cursive. It read, "You don't belong here. Leave before things get complicated." I laughed. Not because it was funny. But because it was absurd. This was my land. My cabin. My peace. But Karen had declared war. Before the confrontation. Before the clipboard. Before the SUV rolled up like a storm in pearls. There was the cabin. And the cabin had a story. It was built in 1973. By a man named Elias. A carpenter by trade. A poet by heart. He came to the lake with nothing but a toolbox, a journal, and a grief too heavy to carry anywhere else. His wife had passed that spring. Cancer. Quick, cruel. And the city, with its sirens and schedules, had become unbearable. So Elias disappeared. Not into despair. But into the woods. He found the land through a friend. Unclaimed. Untouched. Outside the reach of any HOA, any zoning board, any neighborly politics. He built the cabin by hand. One beam at a time. No blueprint. Just instinct. And memory. The walls were cedar, chosen for their scent, sweet, earthy, calming. The windows faced the lake, so he could watch the sunrise without leaving bed. The fireplace was stone, gathered from the shoreline, each one placed with quiet reverence. He carved her name into the mantel. Lena. Just 5 letters. But they held the weight of a lifetime. Elias lived there for 27 years. He fished. He wrote. He planted wildflowers in spring and chopped wood in winter. He spoke to the birds like old friends. And every evening, he lit a candle and whispered her name. The cabin became a sanctuary. Not just for Elias. But for anyone who passed through. Hikers left notes in the mailbox. Poems. Sketches. Thank yous. It was known as the Quiet House. A place where time slowed. Where grief softened. Where silence healed. When Elias passed, the cabin sat empty for a while. The forest grew around it. The dock aged. The wildflowers returned. And then, I found it. I wasn't looking for a cabin. I was looking for a way out. Out of the noise. Out of the endless scroll. Out of the meetings that meant nothing and the deadlines that never ended, I stumbled across the listing by accident. No photos. Just a description. Lakefront cabin. No HOA. Needs love. I drove out the next morning. The road was rough. The trees were thick. And when I saw it, the cedar walls, the moss-covered roof, the dock that creaked like an old man's knees, I knew. This was it. I bought it that week. No negotiation. No inspection. Just trust. And when I stepped inside for the first time, I felt it. The presence. The peace. The echo of Elias and Lena and every soul who had ever sat by that fireplace and whispered to the lake. I found his journal in a drawer. Leather-bound. Worn. Filled with poems and sketches and reflections on grief, love, and the quiet dignity of solitude. One entry read, "The lake does not judge. It does not ask. It does not take. It only holds. And in its stillness, I remember who I am." I copied that onto a piece of driftwood and hung it above the door. And then, Karen arrived. Peace is a fragile thing, and solitude, often mistaken for weakness. Karen had arrived, and she wasn't leaving quietly. The note on my door was just the beginning. Aggressive cursive, thinly veiled threat. "You don't belong here. Leave before things get complicated." I folded it, placed it in a drawer. Not out of fear, but out of ritual. A record of absurdity. The next morning, her SUV blocked my driveway. Parked diagonally, like a barricade. I waited. She didn't move. I walked to the edge of the property. She stood there, arms crossed, sunglasses reflecting the lake. "You're violating community standards," she said. I reminded her again. No HOA. No jurisdiction. No authority. She scoffed. "You'll regret this." That night, classical music blared from her car. 3 a.m. Violins slicing through the silence like knives. I watched from the window. She sat inside, sipping something from a thermos, eyes locked on the cabin. I didn't react. I documented. Every note. Every intrusion. Every moment of madness. She told passing hikers I was squatting. That I was dangerous. That the cabin was condemned. One couple knocked on my door, concerned. I showed them the deed. The journal. The wildflowers Elias had planted. They apologized. Left a note in the mailbox. "Thank you for preserving this place." But Karen wasn't done. She began leaving trash on the dock. Plastic bags. Old newspapers. A broken lawn chair. I cleaned it up. Quietly. Deliberately. Like tending a wound. Then came the final straw. I returned from a supply run. The lake was still. Too still. And then I saw it. The dock, gone. Sawed off. Floating in pieces across the water. I stood there, stunned. The boards bobbed like ghosts. The shoreline looked amputated. She had hired someone. Paid them cash. Told them it was unauthorized construction. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I simply sat on the porch and watched the sun set behind the broken dock. And I made a decision. I called my lawyer. Filed a restraining order. Contacted the county. Submitted every video, every photo, every note. I wasn't just defending property. I was defending memory. Legacy. Sanctuary. And then, I waited. Weeks passed. The lake healed. The birds returned. And Karen vanished. Turns out, she'd been banned. Not just from my land, but from the entire lake. Her HOA disavowed her. Her neighbors turned against her. Her reign of petty terror dissolved. The dock was gone, but the lake remained. Still, patient, waiting for the next chapter. I didn't rush. I let the silence settle. Let the grief breathe. Then I began. One plank at a time. Each board sanded smooth. Each nail tapped with care. Not just construction. Consecration, asterisk asterisk. I found Elias's old toolbox. Rust-kissed. Still smelling of cedar and oil. Inside, a folded note. Build slow. Build true. So I did. The new dock wasn't perfect. It curved slightly. Tilted toward the west. But it held. And it welcomed. I planted wildflowers along the edge. Lupins. Goldenrod. A few stubborn daisies. The birds returned first. Then the frogs. Then the quiet hum of life. Neighbors stopped by. Some brought coffee. Others brought stories. One left a sketch of the cabin, drawn in charcoal, titled, Resilience. I hung it inside, above the fireplace, next to Elias's photo. Karen was gone. But her shadow lingered. I kept the restraining order, filed the paperwork, but I didn't speak of her again. Instead, I spoke of the lake, of the stars, of the way the wind moved through pine. I started writing again, not about conflict, but about stillness, about the way grief becomes ritual, and ritual becomes healing. One night, I sat on the dock, moon high, water glassy, and I whispered, "It's yours again, Elias." The lake didn't answer. It didn't need to. The cabin stood. The dock held. And peace returned. It arrived in early autumn. No return address. Just my name, handwritten in faded ink. The envelope was thick, old, edges curled like dried leaves. Inside, a letter, folded twice, smelling faintly of pine and tobacco. I read it slowly. Each word deliberate. Each sentence, a memory. If you're reading this, it means the cabin found you. I built it for silence, for healing, for the kind of solitude that doesn't feel lonely. It was from Elias. Written years ago. Tucked away in a drawer, never mailed. He spoke of the lake, of the dock, of the way the moonlight danced on water like a prayer. Karen was always loud, but she feared silence more than anything. Don't fight her. Just outlast her. I smiled. He knew. Even then. He ended with a line I read twice, 3 times. Let it settle like mist. The cabin is not mine. It's not yours. It belongs to the quiet. I placed the letter in the journal. Next to the deed. Next to the sketch titled Resilience. That night, I lit a candle. Sat on the dock. Watched the stars blink into being. And I whispered, "Thank you." Not to Elias. Not to the lake. But to the quiet. The cabin stood. The dock held. And the story deepened. It was late October. The trees had turned gold, rust, fire. The lake mirrored them all. I was stacking firewood when I heard it. A car door. Soft, hesitant. I turned. She stood at the edge of the path. Wool coat. Leather satchel. Eyes like memory. "I'm sorry to intrude," she said. "I used to know Elias." I nodded. Invited her in. We didn't speak much. She walked slowly through the cabin, touched the windowsill, paused at the fireplace. Then she saw the sketch. Resilience, asterisk. Her hand trembled. "I drew that," she whispered. "Years ago. Before the silence. We sat on the porch. 2 mugs of tea, steam rising like ghosts. She told me stories. Of Elias's laughter. Of the dock before it warped. Of the time they watched a meteor shower. And swore the lake caught fire. She hadn't been back since he passed. Too much grief. Too little courage. But something had called her. A whisper. A pull. I needed to see if it still held," she said. "The quiet. The grace." I told her it did. That it had bent, but never broken. That even Karen couldn't drown it. She smiled. Left a small envelope on the table. Inside, a photo. Elias, young. Laughing. Holding a fish too big for his arms. On the back. "Let the lake remember." She stayed until sunset, then walked back to her car. No drama. No farewell. Just a wave. And a whisper. "Thank you." The cabin stood. The dock held. And the lake remembered. Winter came slowly. Not with storms. But with silence. The lake froze in layers. Thin sheets of glass. Then thick slabs of memory. I chopped wood. Hung lanterns. Stocked the pantry with dried fruit and tea. Inside, the cabin glowed. Firelight flickered against old beams. Books stacked like sentinels. Blankets folded like promises. Outside, the world hushed. Snow fell in whispers. Pine trees bowed in reverence. I didn't leave for weeks. No need. No desire. The dock slept beneath frost. The wildflowers curled inward. Even the birds paused. I wrote by candlelight. Letters to no one. Stories for the quiet. One morning, I found a fox. Curled beneath the porch. Eyes closed. Breathing slow. I left a bowl of water. A scrap of bread. It stayed for 3 days. Then vanished. I took it as a blessing. Karen was a distant echo. Her chaos melted into snowdrifts. Her absence. A gift. I read Elias's letter again. Let the words warm me. The cabin belongs to the quiet. I whispered it aloud. Let it settle into the walls. Into the floorboards. Into me. Winter didn't feel cold. It felt sacred, like the world had paused. Just long enough to listen. And I listened. To the creak of wood, to the sigh of snow, to the heartbeat of stillness. The cabin stood. The dock slept. And I belonged. Spring didn't arrive all at once. It crept in. Subtle. Patient. The ice cracked first. A slow fracture. Like the lake exhaling. Then came the birds. Warblers. Thrushes. Their song stitched the silence into something new. I opened the windows. Let the air in. It smelled of thawed earth and distant rain. The dock reappeared. Edges softened by snowmelt. Wildflowers pushing through the cracks. I walked its length barefoot. Felt the wood beneath me. Felt the lake watching. Inside, the cabin had changed. Not in structure, but in spirit. The sketch of resilience hung brighter. Elias's photo seemed to smile. The journal had grown thick, with letters never sent. I planted new seeds. Lavender. Mint. A few sunflowers, just to see. Neighbors returned. One brought honey. Another brought a guitar. We sat on the porch. Played softly. Let the lake listen. Karen was a distant season. A storm that passed. A lesson in boundaries. I didn't speak of her. Not out of fear. But out of grace. Instead, I spoke of thaw. Of healing. Of how silence can be a kind of music. One evening, I lit a lantern. Hung it on the dock. Let it sway in the breeze. And I whispered, we begin again. Not as a defense. Not as a retreat. But as a promise. The cabin stood. The dock held. And the quiet welcomed spring.